The baby's screams tore through the frozen Wyoming night like a wounded animal's cry. Inside the cabin, Ethan Cole, 26 years old, widowed for 3 weeks, pressed his calloused palms against his temples and wondered if this was how a man went mad. His daughter had been crying for 6 hours straight. 6 hours. He'd tried everything his fumbling hands could manage, rocking, singing, walking circles until his boots wore grooves in the floorboards. Nothing worked. The child his wife died bringing into this world was slipping away, and he was helpless to stop it. Then he heard footsteps on his porch, and everything changed. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below and let me know where this story finds you. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. The wind howled across the prairie like a living thing with teeth, rattling the shutters of Ethan Cole's cabin and seeping through every crack in the weathered wood. February in Windridge, Wyoming territory was merciless. The kind of cold that didn't just chill your bones, but made you question whether spring was a lie people told to survive winter. Inside the one-room cabin, Ethan walked his daughter back and forth, his arms aching from hours of holding her tiny, rigid body. She couldn't have weighed more than 7 pounds, but grief and exhaustion made her feel like a millstone around his neck. Her face was red and scrunched, mouth open in another endless wail that seemed to pull the air from the room. "Please," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, sweetheart, please." The baby didn't hear him, or if she did, she had no mercy to offer. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks since Sarah died. Ethan's eyes burned, but he had no tears left. He'd cried himself dry the first week, sobbing into his pillow while the baby screamed in her cradle, both of them alone in their anguish. The second week, he'd gone numb, functioning on instinct, feeding her when she'd take the bottle, changing her when the smell became unbearable, moving through the hours like a ghost in his own life. Now, in the third week, he'd entered a new circle of hell, the one where hope died and only terror remained. The baby wasn't gaining weight. Her cries had changed from demanding to desperate. And tonight she wouldn't stop, wouldn't settle, wouldn't even look at him with those dark eyes that were so heartbreakingly like Sarah's. "I don't know what to do," Ethan said to the empty room. "God help me. I don't know what to do." He moved to the window, bouncing the baby gently against his shoulder, and stared out at the darkness. Snow had started falling again, fat flakes drifting down to join the 2 feet already on the ground. The barn was a dark shape 40 yards away. Beyond that, nothing but prairie stretching toward mountains he couldn't see in the blackness. His nearest neighbor, if you could call someone a neighbor when they lived 300 yards away across an open field, was Clara Wynn. He'd seen her exactly twice since moving to Windridge 6 months ago. Once at the general store, where she'd nodded politely and said nothing. Once at a distance, hanging laundry on her line while he repaired his fence. Sarah had tried to befriend her, walking over with a basket of biscuits when they first arrived. She'd come back an hour later, basket still full, looking puzzled. "Strange woman," Sarah had said, setting the basket on the table. "Polite enough, I suppose, but cold. Wouldn't invite me in, wouldn't hardly speak. Just thanked me and closed the door." Ethan hadn't thought much about it then. People had their reasons for keeping to themselves out here. The West was full of folks running from something or someone, trying to disappear into the empty spaces. But now, looking toward where he knew Clara's cabin stood in the darkness, he felt a desperate, irrational urge to run across that field and pound on her door, to beg for help, to hand her this screaming child and say, "Please, you're a woman, you must know something I don't." He didn't, of course. Pride wouldn't let him. Fear of rejection wouldn't let him. Instead, he turned away from the window and carried his daughter back to the rocking chair Sarah had insisted they buy in Cheyenne. It was the only piece of furniture in the cabin that hadn't belonged to someone else first, the only thing they'd chosen together for their new life. Sarah would know what to do. Sarah would have known if the baby was hungry or wet or sick or just lonely. Sarah would have had the instinct, the intuition, the innate knowledge that seemed to come with being a woman. But Sarah was in the ground behind the cabin, buried in frozen earth beside the rose bush she'd planted and never seen bloom. Ethan sat heavily in the rocking chair and tried once more to get his daughter to take the bottle. She turned her face away, crying harder, her little fists clenched and trembling. "Please," he whispered again. "I'm trying. I'm trying so hard." The wind rattled the door, and for a moment, Ethan's exhausted mind conjured the impossible thought that it was Sarah trying to get back in, trying to tell him she'd made a mistake, that she'd chosen wrong, that she wanted to live after all. But when he looked up, the door stayed closed. The wind died down. The only sound was his daughter's cries and the creak of the rocking chair and his own ragged breathing. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been days. The oil lamp on the table burned low, then lower, the light dimming until shadows gathered in the corners like witnesses to his failure. He thought about his own father, dead 10 years now from a kick to the head by a spooked horse. Had his father felt this helpless when Ethan was born? Had he looked at his infant son and wondered if love would be enough, or if children needed more than a father could give? Ethan had been raised by his mother and 2 older sisters after that. They'd taught him to cook and clean and mend his own clothes, skills that served him well as a bachelor cowboy. But they hadn't taught him this. How could they? No one could teach you how to keep a piece of your heart alive when the other piece had been ripped away and buried. The baby's cries grew weaker, and that scared him more than the loud ones. Weak cries meant she was giving up. Weak cries meant she was fading. "No," Ethan said firmly, standing up again, finding energy he didn't know he had. "No, you don't give up. You hear me? You don't get to give up." He walked to the stove and checked the fire. Still going, but low. He added 2 more logs from the stack beside it, wincing at how few remained. He'd need to split more wood tomorrow, need to check on the horses, need to ride into town for supplies, need to do 100 things he had no strength left to do. The baby whimpered against his chest, and Ethan felt a wave of such profound exhaustion wash over him that his knees nearly buckled. When was the last time he'd slept? Really slept? Not those fitful, half-conscious hours when the baby dozed, but actual deep sleep where the world went away and gave you rest? He couldn't remember. He walked to the window again, this time pressing his forehead against the cold glass. The snow was falling heavier now. Another storm rolling in. The barn would need attention in the morning. The roof had been leaking, and if too much snow piled up, it might collapse. One thing at a time, he told himself. Just get through tonight, then get through tomorrow, then the next day. Just keep moving forward. But forward toward what? A life where he was always this tired, always this afraid, always one mistake away from losing the only part of Sarah he had left? The baby made a small, pitiful sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Ethan looked down at her scrunched face, at the wisps of dark hair plastered to her damp forehead, at the way her tiny mouth trembled between wails. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I'm not your mama. I'm sorry I don't know how to fix this. I'm sorry for everything." And then, through the howling wind, he heard it, footsteps on the porch. Ethan's head snapped up. His hand instinctively went to his hip, where his gun belt usually hung, but he'd taken it off hours ago. The footsteps were light, measured, not the heavy tread of a man. The knock, when it came, was soft. 3 gentle raps. Ethan stared at the door, his heart suddenly pounding. No one came calling at, he glanced at the clock, 2 in the morning. No one except someone bringing bad news, or someone drawn by the sound of a crying baby. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and opened the door, expecting, what? The doctor from town? One of the ranch hands from the Double B spread? Instead, he found Clara Wynne standing on his porch, wrapped in a dark wool coat with snow gathering on her shoulders. In the lamplight spilling from his cabin, he could see her face clearly for the first time. Probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back severely, and eyes that held something he couldn't quite name. Not pity, not judgment. Recognition, maybe. Of suffering. Of loss. "I heard the baby," Clara said. Her voice was low, almost hoarse, as if she didn't use it often. "She's been crying for hours." Ethan felt his face flush hot despite the cold. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb. May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. Clara was already stepping forward, and Ethan found himself moving back, letting her enter. She brought the cold with her, and the smell of snow, and something else. Lavender, maybe, or sage. Clara closed the door behind her and immediately turned to Ethan, her eyes going to the baby in his arms. The baby who had miraculously quieted to small hiccuping sobs at the intrusion of this stranger. "When did she last eat?" Clara asked. She won't take the bottle. I've tried every hour, but she just... When did she last take anything? Even a little?" Ethan's mind went blank. Time had become so fluid. Yesterday, maybe? She had a few swallows yesterday afternoon. Clara's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She set down the basket she'd been carrying, Ethan hadn't even noticed it, and unbuttoned her coat. "May I hold her?" Ethan hesitated. This woman was a stranger. He knew nothing about her except that she kept to herself and that Sarah had called her cold. But the baby had been crying for 6 hours, and Clara had crossed 300 yards of frozen prairie in the middle of the night because she heard that crying, and maybe, she knew something he didn't. He held out his daughter. Clara took her with the kind of confidence Ethan lacked, cradling the baby against her chest in one smooth motion. She didn't coo or make nonsense sounds. Instead, she stood very still, looking down at the small face, and began to hum. It wasn't a song Ethan recognized, just a low melodic sound that seemed to come from deep in Clara's chest. She swayed slightly, an unconscious rhythm, and the baby's cries faded to whimpers, then to silence. Ethan stood frozen, watching this miracle. His daughter, who hadn't stopped crying for 6 hours, who'd barely slept in days, was calm. Her eyes were open, staring up at Clara's face with an expression of pure wonder. Clara continued humming as she walked slowly around the cabin, her movements graceful despite the rough floor. She looked at the sparse furnishings, the dishes piled in the basin, the pile of soiled cloths Ethan had been meaning to wash. She said nothing, made no judgment visible on her face. After a few minutes, she spoke without stopping her humming or swaying. "Have you been warming the milk?" "Yes, I warm it on the stove." "How warm?" I just warm it." "Too hot and she won't take it. Too cold and it hurts her stomach." Clara's eyes moved to the stove. "Where's the bottle?" Ethan retrieved it from the table, the rubber nipple slightly chewed, the glass cloudy from inadequate washing. He saw Clara notice both things, but she only said, "Heat water, not too hot. Test it on your wrist. It should feel like nothing, not warm, not cold." Ethan did as instructed, his hands clumsy as he worked the pump and set a pot on the stove. He was aware of Clara behind him, still humming, still swaying. The baby hadn't made a sound. When the water was ready, Clara tested it herself, then showed him how to hold the bottle at the right angle, how to let the baby control the pace, how to watch for signs of swallowing versus just sucking. "Try now," she said, and transferred the baby back to Ethan's arms. He sat in the rocking chair, his daughter tucked into the crook of his elbow, and offered the bottle. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, miracle of miracles, the baby's mouth found the nipple and she began to drink. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them. Clara stood nearby, watching. She was hungry and exhausted, too tired to eat, too hungry to sleep. It's a circle that gets worse. "How did you know?" Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was even softer. "I had a child once. He had colic. There were many nights like this." Ethan looked up sharply. "Had?" Past tense? But before he could ask, Clara had moved to the stove and was examining the pot of rabbit stew he'd made 2 days ago and barely touched. "You need to eat," she said. "You can't care for her if you collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. When did you last have a full meal?" Ethan couldn't remember that either. Clara ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table with a spoon. "Eat. I'll hold her when she's finished." There was something in her tone that made arguing impossible. Ethan found himself obeying, letting Clara take the baby after she'd drained the bottle, watching as his daughter, full and content, finally closed her eyes and slept in this strange woman's arms. The stew was cold and slightly congealed, but Ethan ate it anyway, suddenly ravenous. He couldn't remember food tasting so good. Clara sat in the rocking chair, still holding the sleeping baby, still humming that nameless tune. In the lamplight, with her harsh features softened by shadow, she looked almost peaceful. "I didn't know Sarah well," Clara said after a while. "But I'm sorry for your loss." Ethan swallowed hard. "Thank you. What's the baby's name?" "I haven't—" Ethan stopped, ashamed. "I haven't named her yet. Sarah wanted to wait until she was born, said she'd know the right name when she saw her, but then Sarah died, and you were left with a daughter and a grief too big to name." It wasn't a question. Clara understood. Ethan set down his spoon. "Why did you come? Really?" Clara looked at the baby in her arms, and for the first time her expression cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough for Ethan to see the raw pain underneath. "Because I know what it sounds like when a child is dying," she said simply, and I couldn't bear to hear it again. The words hung in the cold air between them. "Your son," Ethan said carefully. "Where is he now?" "Dead 3 years ago." 3 years? Fever took him in 2 days. "And your husband?" "Dead. A year after that, fell from a horse and broke his neck." Clara said it all without inflection, as if reciting facts about strangers. But Ethan heard the weight beneath the words, the same weight he carried. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Clara nodded once. "The baby needs to be fed every 3 hours, small amounts. If she won't take it, don't force her, but keep trying. Keep the milk the right temperature. Watch for fever, watch for rashes, watch for—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "Watch for everything." "I don't know if I can do this alone." The admission cost him something. Cowboys didn't admit weakness. Men didn't admit fear. But Ethan was so tired of pretending he had any idea what he was doing. Clara stood, still holding the sleeping baby, and looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You're not alone," she said. "Not tonight, anyway." She carried the baby to the cradle near the bed and laid her down with practiced care, tucking the blanket around her small body. The baby didn't stir. Then Clara turned and began tidying the cabin. She didn't ask permission. She simply started washing dishes, organizing the scattered items on the table, folding the clean cloths Ethan had left in a heap. "You don't have to," Ethan started. "I know." But she continued anyway, moving efficiently through the space. After a moment, Ethan joined her, and they worked in silence, two people who understood loss cleaning a dead woman's kitchen while her child finally slept. When the cabin was as orderly as it could be, Clara put her coat back on. Dawn was still hours away, but the wind had died down and the snow had stopped. "Thank you," Ethan said. The words felt desperately inadequate. Clara paused at the door. "Tomorrow night, if she cries like that again, come get me. Don't wait 6 hours." I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. Clara stopped, searching for words. "It's easier to bear pain when you're trying to stop someone else's." She left before Ethan could respond, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. He stood in the doorway and watched until he couldn't see her anymore, until she was just another shadow crossing the frozen field toward her own empty house. Then he closed the door, checked on his sleeping daughter one more time, and finally, allowed himself to collapse onto the bed. He meant to sleep for just a few minutes, just long enough to rest his eyes. When he woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and the baby was crying again, but this time it was the normal cry of a hungry infant, not the desperate wail of dying hope. Ethan stumbled to the cradle, picked up his daughter, and prepared a bottle exactly the way Clara had shown him. His hands were still clumsy, but more confident. The baby drank, and he felt a surge of something he'd almost forgotten: pride. "Maybe I can do this," he thought. Maybe. Through the window, he could see smoke rising from Clara's chimney. She was awake. She'd made it home safely. On his table, he found the basket she'd left behind. Inside, fresh bread, a jar of honey, a small tin of tea, and a piece of paper with careful handwriting. "Feed her every 3 hours. Keep her warm. Trust yourself." Ethan read the note 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the snow from the roof in small, steady drips. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, but somehow, for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan didn't feel quite so alone on it. His daughter finished her bottle and burped against his shoulder. He laughed, actually laughed, at the small sound. We're going to be okay, he told her. I don't know how yet, but we're going to figure it out. The baby stared at him with those dark, serious eyes. We need to name you, Ethan said. Your mama would want you to have a name. He thought about Sarah's favorite flower, the one she'd planted behind the cabin, the one that would bloom in spring, months after she'd be there to see it. Rose, he whispered. Your name is Rose. The baby, Rose, yawned and closed her eyes, content in her father's arms. And in that moment, in that small cabin on the frozen Wyoming prairie, hope began its quiet, stubborn return. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm Ethan had never known before, fragile and tentative, like learning to walk on ice. Rose ate every 3 hours, just as Clara had instructed. She slept in between feedings, her tiny chest rising and falling in the cradle. And Ethan, for the first time since Sarah's death, felt something other than despair. He didn't see Clara during those 3 days, though he looked for her. Every morning when he carried water from the well, his eyes would drift toward her cabin. Smoke rose from her chimney, so he knew she was there. Once, he saw her hanging laundry in the bitter cold, her movements efficient and solitary. He'd raised his hand to wave, but she'd already turned and gone back inside. The basket still sat on his table. He'd eaten the bread and used the honey to sweeten his coffee. But he hadn't returned the basket. Returning it would require walking to her door, knocking, speaking to her. And every time he thought about doing it, his courage failed. What would he say? Thank you seemed insufficient for what she'd done. She'd saved his daughter's life. She'd saved his sanity. How did you repay that kind of debt? On the 4th day, the weather broke. The sun came out properly for the first time in weeks, and the temperature climbed just enough that the icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves began to drip. Ethan decided it was time to stop being a coward. He dressed Rose in the warmest clothes he could find, a tiny gown Sarah had sewn, a blanket Clara had left behind, and bundled her against his chest inside his heavy coat. Then he picked up the basket, took a deep breath, and walked across the field toward Clara's cabin. The snow crunched under his boots. His breath fogged in the air. Rose made small sounds against his chest, not crying, just existing. He could feel her warmth through his shirt. Clara's cabin was smaller than his, but better maintained. The roof didn't sag. The windows had real glass, not oiled paper. A small garden plot, buried under snow now, showed signs of careful tending. Everything about the place spoke of solitude chosen and defended. Ethan climbed the 3 steps to her porch and knocked before he could change his mind. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Clara stood there in a plain gray dress, her hair in that same severe bun, her expression neutral. But her eyes went immediately to the bundle at Ethan's chest, and something flickered there. Something hungry and hurt. I brought your basket back, Ethan said, holding it out awkwardly, and I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. Clara took the basket but didn't step back to let him in. How is she? Good. Better. She's eating regularly now, sleeping. Ethan shifted his weight. I named her Rose. That's a good name. It was Sarah's favorite flower. Clara nodded. A long moment passed. Ethan could hear a clock ticking inside the cabin, could smell something baking, bread maybe, or biscuits. Well, he said finally, I won't keep you. I just wanted to say thank you, and to let you know that if you ever need anything, firewood chopped, repairs done, anything, you just have to ask. He turned to go, feeling foolish. What had he expected? An invitation for coffee? Friendship? The woman had made it clear she preferred solitude. Wait, Ethan turned back. Clara was looking at Rose again, her jaw tight. Does she still cry at night? Sometimes, but not like before. I can usually get her settled within an hour or so. And you? Are you sleeping? The question surprised him. Some. Enough. Clara's fingers tightened on the basket handle. Babies need routine. If you fed her at the same times every day, she'd sleep better at night. I try to, but I'm not always. Sometimes I lose track of time when I'm working. You need a clock. I have a clock. You need to use it. Clara's voice was sharp, almost angry. Then she caught herself and softened. I'm sorry. I don't mean to criticize. You're doing well, better than most men would. I'm just trying not to kill her. The words came out more bitter than Ethan intended. Clara's expression shifted, and for the first time he saw something like sympathy there. "Come in," she said abruptly. "It's too cold to stand on the porch." She stepped back, and Ethan found himself crossing her threshold into a space that was the opposite of his own cabin. Where his was spare and chaotic, Clara's was ordered and full of small touches that spoke of a life carefully maintained. Curtains on the windows, a rug on the floor, books on a shelf, a rocking chair by the fire with a basket of mending beside it, and photographs. 3 of them, in frames on the mantel. Ethan's eyes went to them automatically. A wedding photo. Clara and a tall man with kind eyes, both looking serious the way people did for photographs. A baby in christening gown, and another of a boy maybe 2 years old laughing at something outside the frame. Clara saw him looking. "My husband James, and my son Thomas." "They're beautiful," Ethan said quietly. Clara turned away and busied herself at the stove. "Sit. I'll make tea." Ethan sat in the rocking chair, adjusting Rose in his arms. The cabin was warm, almost too warm after the cold outside. Rose's eyes were open, looking around at this new place with that intense focus babies had. Clara brought 2 cups of tea and sat across from him in a straight-backed chair. She didn't look at Rose, Ethan noticed. She kept her eyes on her tea, or on the fire, or on the wall, anywhere but the baby. "You must think I'm strange," Clara said after a moment. "Coming to your cabin in the middle of the night like that. I think you saved my daughter's life. I heard her crying and I couldn't—" Clara stopped, her hands tightening around her cup. "I had to make it stop. The sound of it. I couldn't bear it." Because it reminded you of Thomas?" Clara nodded slowly. "He had colic. For months he cried every night. James and I would take turns walking him, trying everything. Nothing worked. And then one night he just stopped. Grew out of it, the doctor said. After that he barely cried at all. He was such a happy child." Her voice had gone distant, traveling back to a time when her house was full instead of empty. "How did he die?" Ethan asked gently. "Scarlet fever. It came on fast. One day he was playing, the next he was burning up. We tried everything, cold compresses, medicine from town, prayers. Nothing worked. He died in my arms on the 3rd day." Clara's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white around the cup. "James never recovered. He blamed himself, though there was nothing he could have done. A year later, he took that horse out in a storm, and I think maybe he wasn't trying very hard to stay in the saddle when it bucked." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." "People always say that. I'm sorry. As if words could change anything." Clara looked at him directly for the first time. "But you understand, don't you, what it's like to lose someone and have to keep living anyway? Sarah died 3 weeks ago, and some mornings I still wake up expecting to see her beside me. Then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. It doesn't stop. That feeling, you just get better at carrying it." They sat in silence for a while. 2 people who understood the weight of grief. Rose began to fuss, and Ethan automatically shifted her, checking if she needed changing or was just restless. Clara watched him with an expression he couldn't read. "You're learning. That's good. I don't have much choice. You have family, someone who could help?" "My mother and sisters are in Kansas. I wrote to them, but even if they wanted to come, it would take weeks." Ethan hesitated. "And honestly, I'm not sure I want them here. They'd take over. Tell me I'm doing everything wrong. Try to convince me to move back home." "Would that be so bad?" "This is my home now. Mine and Rose's. Sarah is buried here. I can't just leave her." Clara nodded slowly. "No. You can't leave your dead. They anchor you, don't they? Keep you in one place even when everything else tells you to run. Is that why you stayed in Windridge?" "I stayed because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and because leaving felt like giving up, like admitting they were really gone." Clara set down her teacup. "May I hold her?" The question seemed to cost her something. Ethan saw her hands tremble slightly before she clasped them together. "Of course." He stood and carefully transferred Rose into Clara's arms. Clara held her with the same confidence as before, But this time Ethan saw the pain in her eyes as she looked down at the baby's face. "She has your eyes," Clara said softly. "But her mother's mouth." "You think so?" "Yes." Clara's thumb traced Rose's tiny hand. "She's going to be beautiful." Rose grabbed Clara's finger with that instinctive grip babies had, and Clara's breath caught. For a long moment, she just stared at that small hand wrapped around her finger. Then very quietly, she began to cry. Not sobbing, just silent tears sliding down her cheeks as she held another woman's baby and remembered her own. Ethan didn't know what to do. He sat frozen, watching this woman's private grief spill over in his presence. Should he take Rose back? Should he leave? Should he say something? In the end, he did nothing. Just let Clara cry while holding his daughter, understanding that sometimes pain needed witness more than comfort. After a few minutes, Clara wiped her eyes with one hand, still holding Rose with the other. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Please." Clara looked at him, her eyes red but clear. "I haven't held a baby since Thomas died. I didn't think I could, but she needed me that night, and I couldn't let her suffer when I knew how to help." "I'm glad you did. For her sake and mine. It hurts, holding her, but it also—" Clara stopped, searching for words. "It also feels like maybe I'm not completely broken, like maybe I still have something to give." Rose chose that moment to yawn hugely, her small mouth opening wide. Clara laughed, an actual, genuine laugh that transformed her entire face. "She's tired," Clara said. "You should take her home for her nap. Thank you for the tea and for—" Ethan gestured vaguely. "For everything." Clara stood and transferred Rose back to him, but this time she didn't immediately step away. "If you need help, I'm here. Not every day, not all the time. But when you need someone who understands babies, you can come to me." "That's generous. It's selfish, actually. Helping you helps me. Gives me something to do besides sit in this house and remember." Ethan adjusted Rose in his arms. "Then I'll take you up on it. Because I have no idea what I'm doing, and Rose deserves better than me fumbling around in the dark." "You're doing better than you think, but yes, come when you need to." Ethan left with Rose bundled against his chest and hope blooming cautiously in his chest. The walk back across the field felt shorter somehow, lighter. Over the next week, a routine developed. Ethan would work in the mornings, chopping wood, tending the horses, doing the repairs his cabin desperately needed, while Rose slept. In the afternoons, he'd bundle her up and walk to Clara's cabin. At first, he'd knock and wait to be invited in, but after a few days, Clara told him to stop knocking. "Just come in. I'm always here." She taught him things Sarah would have known instinctively: how to bathe Rose without terrifying her, how to recognize the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry and a something hurts cry, how to trim her tiny fingernails without cutting her, how to make her laugh by blowing gently on her stomach. And slowly, carefully, Clara began to come back to life. It started with small things. A smile when Rose grabbed at Clara's hair, a story about Thomas and the time he'd tried to eat dirt from the garden, a joke about how men thought they were strong until faced with a diaper that needed changing. Ethan found himself looking forward to those afternoon visits, not just because Clara was teaching him how to care for his daughter, but because the cabin felt less empty when Clara was in it. She'd sit in the rocking chair with Rose in her lap, singing those wordless songs, and the whole room would feel warmer. One afternoon, almost 2 weeks after Clara had first knocked on his door, Ethan arrived to find her garden plot cleared of snow. "I'm planting in the spring," Clara explained when she saw him looking. "Vegetables, mostly. Maybe some flowers. The soil is good here." "I could help. Turn the earth when the ground thaws." "You have enough to do with your own place." "I want to help." Clara studied him for a long moment. "Why?" Ethan thought about lying, about saying something noble about neighborly duty or repaying debts. But Clara had cried in front of him. She'd shown him her grief. She deserved honesty. "Because when I'm here, I don't feel so alone. And I think maybe you don't either." Clara's expression softened. "No, I don't." That evening, Clara walked back with him to his cabin, carrying Rose while Ethan hauled a basket of vegetables from her root cellar. She stayed for dinner. rabbit stew again, but this time Clara showed him how to make it properly, with herbs and root vegetables and enough salt to actually taste good. They ate at his small table while Rose slept in her cradle. They talked about nothing important, the weather, the state of the roads, whether spring would come early or late. Easy conversation between two people learning how to be less lonely together. When Clara got up to leave, full dark had fallen outside. "It's too late to walk back alone," Ethan said. "I'll walk you. I've walked that path 100 times in the dark." "I know, but let me walk you anyway." So they went together through the cold night, Rose asleep against Ethan's chest, Clara walking beside him with a lantern held high. The stars were brilliant overhead, the kind of stars you only saw far from cities, and their breath fogged white in the air. At Clara's door, she turned to him. "Thank you for dinner. Thank you for making it edible," she smiled. "Same time tomorrow?" "Same time." Ethan walked home feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks: contentment. Not happiness, not yet, but a sense that life might be bearable after all. But Windridge was a small town, and nothing stayed private for long. The talk started at the general store, where Ethan had stopped to buy flour and coffee. Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, had given him a look that was half pity, half something else. "How are you managing, Mr. Cole? With the baby and all?" "Well enough, ma'am." "I heard Clara Wynne has been helping you. How kind of her." The way she said kind made it sound like something else entirely. Ethan had ignored it, paid for his purchases, and left. But a few days later, when he'd gone to the feed store, the owner had made a similar comment. "Saw Clara at your place yesterday afternoon. Must be a comfort, having a woman around to help with the baby." Again, that strange emphasis that made Ethan's shoulders tense. Then, on Sunday, when Ethan had taken Rose into town to see the doctor for a checkup, he'd overheard two women talking outside the church. It's not proper, if you ask me, her spending so much time at a widower's home. Well, they're both lonely, and it's only been 3 weeks since his wife died. Barely cold in the ground, and already he's got another woman cooking in her kitchen. Clara Wynne has always been odd, living out there alone for years. Maybe she sees her chance to get a husband and someone else's baby all at once. Ethan had wanted to turn around and tell them they had no idea what they were talking about, that Clara was helping him keep his daughter alive, that there was nothing improper about two grieving people finding comfort in shared understanding. But he'd said nothing, just held Rose closer and kept walking. That afternoon, when he arrived at Clara's cabin, he found her sitting on her porch despite the cold, her hands folded in her lap, her face set in hard lines. "You heard," Ethan said. "Mrs. Henderson came by this morning to warn me. Apparently I'm causing a scandal. What people think doesn't matter. Doesn't it?" Clara stood, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Your wife has been dead less than a month, Ethan. I'm a widow. We're spending hours together every day. People talk. Let them talk. It's not that simple. You're a man. Talk rolls off you. But I'm a woman, and I've already lived through this town's judgment once." Clara's voice was bitter. "When James died, they whispered that I drove him to it, that I wasn't a good enough wife, that if I'd been warmer, softer, more of what a woman should be, he wouldn't have taken that horse out in a storm. That's not true. Truth doesn't matter when people want something to gossip about." Clara looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in Ethan's arms. "I think it's best if I stop coming around for a while. Let the talk die down." "No." The word came out harder than Ethan intended. "No, I need your help. Rose needs you. Rose needs to eat and sleep and be kept warm. You can do that now. I taught you. It's not just about feeding her. It's—" Ethan struggled for words. "When you're there, it feels like I'm not failing. Like I might actually be able to do this. Please don't let small-minded gossips take that away." Clara's resolve wavered. He could see it in her eyes. But then she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I truly am. But I can't be the target of that kind of talk again. I survived it once. I don't think I could survive it twice." She went inside and closed the door, and Ethan stood on her porch holding his daughter and feeling the fragile routine they'd built crumbling around him. He didn't go back the next day or the day after. He managed on his own, feeding Rose and changing her and walking her when she cried. But the cabin felt emptier than before, lonelier. because now he knew what it was like to have company, to have help, to have someone who understood. And losing it hurt almost as much as losing Sarah had. Almost. On the third night, a storm rolled in with violent fury. Wind howled around the cabin, driving snow against the windows and sheets. Thunder, rare for winter, boomed across the prairie, and lightning flickered in the clouds. Rose woke screaming, terrified by the noise. Ethan picked her up, held her, tried to soothe her, but she wouldn't calm. The thunder kept coming, and with each boom, Rose's cries grew more frantic. "It's okay," Ethan murmured, walking her back and forth. "It's just a storm. It can't hurt you. You're safe." But Rose didn't understand words. She only understood fear. Ethan was so focused on his daughter that he almost didn't hear the first crash. But the second one, louder, closer, made him freeze. Something had happened outside, something bad. He carried Rose to the window and peered out into the storm. Lightning flashed, and in that brief illumination he saw Clara's cabin, saw the tree branch that had fallen across her porch, saw a figure in white, Clara, struggling with something, trying to move the branch. Then the figure fell. Ethan didn't think. He wrapped Rose in every blanket he could find, bundled her inside his coat, grabbed a lantern, and ran out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Snow stung his face. But he pushed forward, running across the field toward Clara's cabin, toward the woman who'd saved his daughter and then walked away to protect her reputation. He found her on the porch, pinned under a smaller branch, her arm bent at a wrong angle. Blood stained the snow beside her. "Clara!" She looked up, her face white with pain. "Ethan? What are you—" "Hold still. I'll get you out." He set the lantern down and carefully lifted the branch off her. Clara gasped, cradling her injured arm against her chest. "Can you stand?" "I think so. She tried, and nearly fell. Ethan caught her. Rose pressed between them. "I'm taking you to my cabin. Don't argue." Clara didn't have the strength to argue. Ethan half carried her across the field, fighting the wind and snow every step. Rose was crying against his chest. Clara was barely conscious against his side, and Ethan had never been more terrified in his life. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, through the storm, through the fear, through everything. He kicked open his cabin door and half-dragged Clara inside, settling her into the rocking chair. Her arm was definitely broken. He could see the swelling even through her sleeve. Blood seeped from a cut on her forehead. "Stay here," he told her unnecessarily. "I'll get water and bandages." He worked quickly, Rose still bundled against his chest. He cleaned Clara's head wound first. Not deep, thank heaven, but bleeding heavily the way head wounds did. Then he examined her arm. "This needs a doctor," he said. "Can't get to town in this storm." "Then I'll set it myself." "Ethan, you don't know how—" "I've set horses' legs before. Can't be that different." It was different, and worse, and Clara nearly passed out from the pain. But Ethan managed it, splinting her arm with wooden spoons and torn sheets. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold until morning when he could get her to the doctor. By the time he finished, Rose had cried herself to sleep. The storm was beginning to weaken, and Clara sat in his rocking chair, pale and shaking, looking at him with something like wonder. "You came," she whispered. "In the middle of a storm, with a baby. You came." "Of course I came." "Why?" Ethan knelt in front of her, careful not to jostle her injured arm. "Because I need you, Clara. Not just for Rose, for me. You make this bearable, and I don't care what anyone in town says about it." Clara's good hand came up to touch his face. "They'll talk more now, when they see I stayed here overnight. Let them talk, I don't care. Your reputation? To hell with my reputation." Ethan caught her hand, held it. "You crossed that fence the first night because you couldn't bear to hear my daughter suffer. Tonight I crossed it because I couldn't bear the thought of you hurt and alone. That's not scandal. That's just two people taking care of each other." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan. I don't know if I can open my heart again after losing so much." "Then don't. Not yet. Just stay. Just be here. We'll figure out the rest later." Outside, the storm began to fade. Inside, Clara nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." And in that moment, As Rose slept between them and the fire crackled and the storm retreated across the prairie, something fundamental shifted. Clara wasn't a helpful neighbor anymore. She wasn't a kind stranger or a temporary solution. She was essential, and both of them knew it. Morning came gray and cold, the storm's aftermath leaving the prairie blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled under weak sunlight. Ethan woke in his chair by the fire, his neck stiff and his back aching. Rose was asleep in her cradle, and Clara was still in the rocking chair, her injured arm cradled against her chest, her eyes open and staring at the ceiling. "How long have you been awake?" Ethan asked, his voice rough from sleep. "An hour. Maybe more." Clara shifted carefully, wincing. "I didn't want to wake you. You needed the rest." "How's the arm?" "Hurts like hell, but it's my own fault for trying to move that branch alone." Ethan stood and went to check on Rose, who stirred but didn't wake. Then he moved to the stove and started building up the fire. "I'll take you to the doctor after breakfast. Get that arm properly set." "People will see." "I don't care." "You should care." Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "Mrs. Henderson will have told half the town by now that I'm helping you. When they see me leaving your cabin first thing in the morning, with a broken arm no less, they'll assume the worst. Then they can assume. I'm not going to let you sit here in pain because small-minded people have nothing better to do than gossip." Clara was silent for a long moment. "You're a stubborn man, Ethan Cole?" "So I've been told." He made coffee and heated leftover biscuits, and they ate in companionable silence while Rose continued to sleep. The storm had exhausted her, and Ethan was grateful for the extra rest. He'd need his strength for what was coming. The ride into town took over an hour in the wagon, the horses struggling through drifts where the wind had piled snow across the road. Clara sat beside him, her arm held close, her face pale, but composed. Rose was bundled between them in a nest of blankets. They passed the Henderson place first. Mrs. Henderson was outside sweeping her porch, and her broom stopped mid-stroke when she saw the wagon. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed. Ethan tipped his hat and kept driving. At the doctor's office, Doc Murray took one look at Clara's arm and shook his head. "What fool tried to set this?" "I did," Ethan said. "In the middle of a storm, with no other choice." Doc Murray grunted. "Well, the fool did a passable job. Bones are aligned well enough, but we'll need to reset it properly and put on a proper cast." He looked at Clara. "This is going to hurt worse than when you broke it." "I know." Ethan held Rose outside while Doc Murray worked. He could hear Clara's sharp intake of breath, the sound of her biting back cries of pain. Each sound made his chest tighten with helpless fury. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the door opened and Doc Murray emerged. "She'll be fine. Arm needs to stay in that cast for 6 weeks minimum. She shouldn't be lifting anything heavy or doing any work that requires 2 hands." The doctor looked at Ethan meaningfully. "She's going to need help." "She'll have it." Doc Murray nodded slowly. "People are already talking, son. You know that, don't you?" "I know." "And you don't care?" "Not enough to let her struggle alone." The doctor's weathered face creased into something that might have been approval. "Your wife was a good woman. She'd want her daughter cared for properly. If Clara Wynne is the one doing that caring, then that's nobody's business but yours." "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me yet. You've got a storm coming that has nothing to do with the weather." The doctor was right. By the time they left his office, 3 people had found reasons to walk past and stare. At the general store where Ethan stopped to buy supplies, Mrs. Henderson was waiting behind the counter with her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Wynne, how unexpected to see you both together this morning." Clara's back stiffened. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. I heard about your accident. How fortunate that Mr. Cole was there to help." The words dripped with insinuation. "One might wonder what you were doing outside in such a terrible storm." "A branch fell on my porch," Clara said evenly. "I was trying to clear it when I fell, and Mr. Cole just happened to see this? In the middle of the night? In a blizzard?" Ethan set his purchases on the counter with enough force to make Mrs. Henderson jump. "I saw it because I was looking out my window. Clara is my neighbor. When I saw she was hurt, I helped her. That's what neighbors do." "Of course. How noble." Mrs. Henderson began tallying his purchases with sharp, angry movements, though some might say it's quite convenient. A widower with a baby he can't care for. A widow with no family. Both of you so very alone. What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Henderson? The storekeeper's wife looked up, her eyes hard. I'm not suggesting anything, Mr. Cole. I'm simply observing that your wife has been dead less than a month, and already you've got another woman staying in your home overnight. It looks improper. It looks like you're replacing poor Sarah before she's even cold in the ground. Clara's face went white. Ethan felt rage boil up in his chest, hot and dangerous. My wife died bringing my daughter into this world, he said, his voice low and tight. And I have been trying every single day not to let that baby die too. Clara Wynne has helped me keep my daughter alive. If you want to make that into something dirty, that says more about you than it does about us. I'm just repeating what everyone in town is saying. Then everyone in town can go to hell. Mrs. Henderson gasped. Mr. Cole, such language is exactly what your gossip deserves. Now total my purchases so we can leave. The ride back to the cabin was silent. Clara stared straight ahead, her good hand clenched in her lap. Rose slept peacefully, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. Finally, as they neared home, Clara spoke. She's right, you know. It does look improper. I don't care. You should. You have a daughter to raise in this town. Her reputation will be tied to yours. If people think badly of you, they'll think badly of her. Then we'll move. Find someplace where nobody knows us. Running away doesn't solve anything. It just means you're letting them win. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of his cabin. Then what do you suggest? Because I'm not going to stop letting you help with Rose. I need you, and she needs you. And that's not going to change just because Mrs. Henderson has a nasty mind. Clara turned to look at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe she needs me too much. What does that mean? It means I'm becoming a replacement for Sarah, in Rose's eyes, in your life. And that's not fair to any of us. Clara's voice broke. I'm not Sarah. I can never be Sarah. And Rose deserves to know who her real mother was. She'll know. I'll tell her about Sarah every day. While I'm there doing all the things Sarah should be doing, feeding her, bathing her, singing to her. Clara shook her head. I'm stealing Sarah's place, Ethan, and eventually Rose won't remember there ever was a Sarah. She'll just know me. Is that so terrible? Yes, because I'll die too. Everyone I love dies, and when I do, Rose will lose another mother. How is that fair to her? The raw pain in Clara's voice made Ethan's chest ache. He reached for her good hand, but she pulled away. Take me home, she said. Please, just take me home. So he did, driving the wagon across the field to her cabin, helping her down, carrying her supplies inside. The place felt cold and empty, the fire long dead in the stove. Let me get your fire going, Ethan said. I can manage. With one arm? I've managed worse. But she swayed on her feet, and Ethan caught her elbow. Clara, please. Let me help. That's the problem, don't you see? Clara pulled away from him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've let you help. I've let myself need you and Rose. And now I don't know how to stop. Then don't stop. I have to. Before this goes any further, before the whole town decides we're... She couldn't finish the sentence. Before they decide we're what? Falling in love? The words were out before Ethan could stop them, hanging in the cold air between them. Clara stared at him, her breath catching. Don't. Don't what? Don't say what we're both feeling? We're not feeling anything. We're two lonely people clinging to each other out of desperation. That's not love, that's just survival. And what if it's both? Clara turned away, moving to the window that looked out across the field toward his cabin. I loved James. I loved him so much that when he died, I wanted to die too. I can't go through that again. I can't love someone and lose them. You're already loving Rose. I see it every time you hold her. That's different. Is it? Because it looks the same to me. You're already attached, Clara. You've already let her into your heart, and maybe you've let me in too. And that terrifies you because it means you're alive again. It means you're feeling things you thought were dead. Clara's shoulders shook, and Ethan knew she was crying, though he couldn't see her face. He crossed the room and stood behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. "Scared of failing Rose, scared of dishonoring Sarah's memory, scared that I'm feeling things for you that I shouldn't feel, but I'm more scared of pushing you away and having to face everything alone again. The town can say what they want. I don't care about the town. I care about my daughter having someone who knows how to love her. And I care about you not spending the rest of your life alone in this cabin because you're too afraid to let anyone close." Clara turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "What if I hurt her? What if I love her and then I die and she's left with another loss? What if you live? What if you stay and watch her grow up and teach her all the things Sarah would have taught her? What if we build something good here, despite everything? It's too soon. Sarah just died. I know, and part of me feels guilty every time I look at you and feel something other than grief. But Sarah would want Rose cared for. She'd want me to accept help, and I think she'd want both of us to keep living." Clara reached up with her good hand and touched Ethan's face, her fingers trembling. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "Then we'll be strong together." For a moment, Ethan thought she might kiss him. For a moment, he wanted her to, but instead Clara dropped her hand and stepped back. "I need time," she said. "Time to think, time to figure out what's real and what's just two broken people trying to feel whole again." "How much time?" "I don't know." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that time wouldn't change anything, that they needed each other and that was enough. But he also understood fear, understood the need to protect yourself from more loss. "Okay," he said finally. "Take your time. But I'm still coming to check on you. Make sure you're managing with that arm." "Ethan, that's not negotiable. You can push me away all you want emotionally, but practically, you need help, and I'm going to provide it." A ghost of a smile crossed Clara's face. "Stubborn? Determined." He left her then, walking back across the field to his cabin where Rose was starting to wake and cry. He fed her and changed her and walked her around the small room. And the whole time he thought about Clara in her empty cabin, probably crying, probably scared, probably convinced she was doing the right thing by pushing him away. The next week was the longest of Ethan's life. He kept his word and checked on Clara daily, bringing her food, making sure her fire was lit, helping with tasks that required two hands. But she was distant, polite, but cold, keeping him at arm's length both literally and figuratively. Rose began to notice. She'd look toward the door when Ethan carried her around, as if expecting Clara to walk through it. She'd fuss more, cry longer, as if she sensed something was missing. And the talk in town got worse. Ethan heard it everywhere. At the feed store, outside the church, in the saloon where he stopped for a whiskey one evening after putting Rose to bed. Heard Clara Wynn's been staying away from the Cole place. About time. Widow woman had no business spending so much time with a widower. People were starting to wonder. Wonder about what? About whether that baby was the only thing keeping him warm at night, if you know what I mean. Ethan had left before he did something he'd regret. Before he punched someone and gave the town something real to gossip about. But the damage was done. Not just to his reputation or Clara's, but to something more fundamental. The town had taken something innocent and twisted it into something ugly. And in doing so, they'd driven Clara away from the one place she'd started to feel alive again. 2 weeks after the storm, on a Tuesday afternoon, Ethan was chopping wood behind his cabin when he heard a wagon approaching. He looked up to see Pastor Williams from the church climbing down, his face grave. "Mr. Cole, do you have a moment?" Ethan set down his axe, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "Pastor, what brings you out here?" "Concern. For you and for Mrs. Wynn." The pastor folded his hands in front of him in that way religious men did when preparing to deliver difficult truths. "There's been talk in town. A great deal of talk." "I'm aware. Are you aware that some members of my congregation have suggested I speak to you about the impropriety of your relationship with Mrs. Wynn?" "There is no relationship. She helped me with my daughter, that's all." "And yet she stayed overnight in your home, unchaperoned, while your wife has been dead less than 2 months." Ethan felt his temper rising. She was injured. There was a storm. What was I supposed to do? Leave her to freeze? Of course not. But surely you can see how it appears. A young widower and a widow spending time alone together, and now she's staying away because she knows how it looks. Pastor Williams's voice softened. I'm not here to judge you, son. I'm here to help you understand that in a small town like Windridge, appearances matter, especially when there's a child involved. So, what are you suggesting? That I stop accepting help with my daughter because people have dirty minds? I'm suggesting that if you value Mrs. Wynn's reputation and your own, you might consider being more circumspect. Have other women help with the baby. Mrs. Henderson has offered, as has Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Henderson can barely stand to look at me. And Mrs. Patterson has 6 children of her own. They don't want to help. They want to control. Nevertheless, nothing. Clara Wynne saved my daughter's life. She's been kinder to me in my grief than anyone in this town. And if people want to make that into something sinful, that's their problem, not mine. Pastor Williams sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Mr. Cole, I'm not your enemy, but I am trying to protect your daughter's future. If you continue down this path, people will talk. And when Rose is old enough to go to school, to make friends, to find a husband someday, that talk will follow her. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered that the choices he made now might affect Rose years down the line. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I want you to think carefully about your actions, about what message you're sending, and I want you to consider that perhaps Mrs. Wynne has made the right choice in distancing herself. The pastor put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Sometimes the loving thing is to let go. After the pastor left, Ethan stood in the cold, staring at nothing. Rose was napping inside. Clara was in her cabin across the field, probably staring out her window at his place the way he sometimes caught himself staring at hers. And the whole town was watching, waiting, judging. That night, as Ethan rocked Rose to sleep, a new storm rolled in. Not as violent as the last one, but steady and cold. Wind howled around the cabin. Snow piled against the windows. And through it all, Rose wouldn't settle. She cried and fussed, arching her back, pushing away the bottle. Ethan tried everything Clara had taught him, but nothing worked. What's wrong? He murmured, walking her back and forth. Tell me what's wrong, sweetheart. But babies couldn't tell you. They could only cry and hope someone understood. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Rose's cries weakened to whimpers, then picked up again with renewed intensity. Ethan's arms ached. His head pounded. Exhaustion made the room spin. He thought about carrying Rose through the storm to Clara's cabin. Thought about pounding on her door and begging for help. But he couldn't. Not after the pastor's visit. Not after seeing the fear in Clara's eyes when she'd talked about loving and losing. So he kept walking, kept rocking, kept murmuring useless comfort to a baby who needed more than he could give. At some point, after 2 a.m, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm or the baby or his own ragged breathing. A crash, from Clara's direction, loud enough to carry across the field even in the wind. Ethan froze, listening. Another sound, fainter. Was that Clara calling out? He looked down at Rose, still crying in his arms, looked at the door, at the storm beyond it. Clara had a broken arm. If something had happened, if she'd fallen, if she needed help. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Just bundled Rose into every blanket he owned, tucked her inside his coat, grabbed his lantern, and ran out into the storm for the second time in 2 weeks. The wind was worse than before, driving snow so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. But he knew the path by heart now, had walked it dozens of times, could have found Clara's cabin blind. He found her collapsed just inside her door, her face twisted in pain. A lamp lay shattered on the floor beside her, oil spreading across the wood. Her cast-bound arm was clutched to her chest, and she was trying to stand on a leg that clearly couldn't hold her weight. Clara! Ethan set the lantern down and dropped to his knees beside her, Rose wailing between them. Ethan, how did you... Clara's words were slurred, confused. What happened? I got up to add wood to the fire. Dizzy. I fell and... She looked at the shattered lamp, then at the oil creeping toward the stove. You need to clean that up. If it reaches the fire... Forget the fire. Can you stand? My ankle. I think I twisted it when I fell. Rose's cries intensified, as if she sensed the danger. Ethan looked from Clara to the spreading oil to the door still open behind him, letting in wind and snow. "I'm taking you to my cabin," he said. "You can't carry both of us. Watch me." He shifted Rose to one arm, used the other to help Clara up. She tried to put weight on her injured ankle and gasped. "Lean on me," Ethan commanded. "The oil, I'll come back for it after you're safe." They stumbled through the storm together, Clara hopping on one foot, Ethan supporting her weight while clutching Rose with his other arm. It was awkward and slow and terrifying. Every gust of wind threatened to knock them over. Rose screamed the whole way. But they made it. Ethan kicked open his cabin door and half-carried Clara inside, depositing her in the rocking chair. Rose was still screaming, red-faced and furious. "Stay here," Ethan told Clara. "I need to clean up that oil before your cabin burns down. Take Rose with you. I know what she needs." Ethan looked at the baby in his arms, then at Clara in the chair. "She needs you." Before Clara could protest, Ethan set Rose in her lap. The baby immediately quieted, her cries fading to whimpers as she felt Clara's familiar presence. Clara's good arm came around Rose automatically, holding her close. "Ethan, I'll be right back." He ran through the storm to Clara's cabin, cleaned up the oil as best he could, banked her fire, grabbed clothes and supplies she'd need. Then he locked her door and returned to his own cabin. Inside, Clara was crying silently while holding Rose, who had fallen asleep against her chest. The baby's small hand was wrapped around Clara's finger, holding on tight. "She knew," Clara whispered when Ethan came in. "The moment you put her in my arms, she knew. She stopped crying like I was what she'd been waiting for all along." Ethan closed the door against the storm and moved to kneel in front of the rocking chair. "Because you are. You're what we've both been waiting for." "The town? To hell with the town. Clara, look at me." He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. "Rose just chose you. Not because I told her to. Not because there was no one else. But because on some level that babies understand better than adults. She knows you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be hers." "I'm not her mother. Maybe not by blood, but every other way that matters, yes, you are." Clara looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully for the first time in hours. "I'm so scared." "I know, me too, but we can be scared together." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something fundamental shifted and settled into place. Clara didn't leave that night, or the next morning. When her ankle proved too injured to walk on, she stayed another day, then another. And slowly, without either of them quite deciding it, temporary became permanent. The town noticed, of course. Talk exploded, but Ethan and Clara had stopped listening. They were too busy learning how to be a family. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Clara slept in Ethan's bed while he took the floor beside Rose's cradle. During the day, she sat in the rocking chair with her injured ankle propped up, holding Rose or directing Ethan through tasks he'd never done properly. How to mend a torn shirt, how to season meat so it actually had flavor, how to organize the cabin so things could be found when needed. They didn't talk about what it meant that she was still there, didn't discuss the future or acknowledge the present. They simply existed in a careful bubble where the only things that mattered were Rose's needs and Clara's healing and getting through each day without confronting the questions that lurked beneath every shared glance. On the 4th morning, Clara woke before dawn and tested her ankle. The swelling had gone down considerably. She could put weight on it without gasping in pain. Her arm was still useless in its cast, but the ankle was healing faster than expected. She stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered prairie, and knew the time had come. She couldn't stay here indefinitely. Couldn't keep pretending this arrangement was temporary when every day made it harder to imagine leaving. Behind her, she heard Ethan stirring. The creak of floorboards. The sound of him checking on Rose, who was just beginning to make her morning sounds. Not crying yet, just small noises that said she was waking and would need attention soon. "You're up early," Ethan said quietly, his voice still rough with sleep. "Couldn't sleep. Ankle bothering you?" "No, it's better actually. I think I can walk on it now." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meaning. If Clara could walk, she could leave, could return to her own cabin, could end this strange limbo they'd been living in. "That's good," Ethan said finally. "That it's healing, I mean. I... Clara turned to face him. He stood by Rose's cradle in his undershirt and trousers, his hair rumpled, his face shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He looked tired and uncertain and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I should go home today, Claire said. Get out of your way. You're not in my way. Ethan, I know you need to go. I just... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this without you anymore. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Clara felt her heart clench. You managed before I came along. Barely. I was drowning, Clara. You know I was. And these past few days, with you here, it's been... He struggled for words. It's been the closest to okay I've felt since Sarah died. Clara moved toward him, her steps still slightly uneven. That's exactly why I need to leave. Because this is starting to feel normal, starting to feel like something it can't be. Why can't it be? Because your wife died 2 months ago. Because the whole town is talking about us. Because Rose needs to know who her real mother was, not just accept me as a replacement. You're not a replacement. Then what am I? The question caught Ethan off guard. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw the fear and hope and confusion written across her face. You're... He started, then stopped. How did you name something that defied easy categorization? You're essential, to Rose, to me. You're the person who crossed the fence when we needed you most, and you keep crossing it, even when it scares you, even when it hurts. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Rose began to cry in earnest, demanding breakfast and attention. Clara moved to pick her up, but Ethan was closer. He lifted his daughter from the cradle, and Rose immediately reached toward Clara, her small arms outstretched. See? Ethan said softly. She knows. She's known from the start. Clara took Rose despite her better judgment, settling into the rocking chair with the baby in her good arm. Rose nuzzled against her, content just to be held. I'll make breakfast, Ethan said. Then we'll talk about what comes next. But before he could move to the stove, they heard it. The sound of a wagon approaching. Multiple wagons from the sound of it. Ethan moved to the window and looked out, his expression hardening. It's the church women, Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Patterson, and a few others I don't recognize. Clara's face went pale. They know I'm here. Of course they know. The whole town probably knows by now. Then this is it. This is them coming to make sure I leave, to protect your reputation and Rose's future. Let them try. Ethan opened the door before the women could knock. 5 of them stood on his porch, all dressed in their Sunday best despite it being a Thursday morning. Mrs. Henderson was in front, her face set in righteous determination. Mr. Cole, we've come to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy. Then speak. May we come in? Ethan glanced back at Clara, who sat frozen in the rocking chair with Rose in her arms. Then he looked back at the women. No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it from there. Mrs. Henderson's lips thinned. Very well. We've come as representatives of the Church Women's Auxiliary. It's come to our attention that Mrs. Wynne has been staying in your home for several days now, unchaperoned, while you're both unmarried. She was injured. She couldn't walk. Nevertheless, the situation is highly improper. We've come to collect Mrs. Wynne and take her back to her own home, where she can be cared for by proper female company. Clara is staying where she is. A murmur ran through the group of women. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her expression more pitying than judgmental. Mr. Cole, we understand you're in a difficult position. Raising a baby alone is challenging, but accepting help from a widow woman in this manner is not the solution. It damages both your reputations and sets a poor example for your daughter. My daughter is 2 months old. I don't think she's paying attention to examples yet. But the town is paying attention, Mrs. Henderson said sharply. And what they see is a man who couldn't wait even 3 months before installing another woman in his dead wife's place. Ethan felt rage surge through him, hot and dangerous. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't we? We see a widower who's too weak to manage alone. A widow who's desperate enough to compromise her dignity for the chance at having a family again. And a baby who's going to grow up thinking this sort of arrangement is acceptable. Get off my property. Mr. Cole, I said get off my property, now, before I do something we'll all regret. The women retreated a few steps, but Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. If you continue down this path, the church will have no choice but to take action. For the sake of your daughter's moral upbringing, we may be forced to petition for custody. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. You can't do that. We can if we believe the child is being raised in an immoral environment. A judge might agree that a baby girl needs a proper home with a married couple, not a widower living in sin with his neighbor. Clara appeared in the doorway behind Ethan, still holding Rose. Her face was white, but her voice was steady. Leave. All of you. Now. Mrs. Wynne, we're trying to help you. Help me? You've done nothing but gossip and judge since I moved to this town. When my son died, where were you? When my husband fell and broke his neck, where were your casseroles and your comfort? You left me alone in my grief because I wasn't warm enough, wasn't friendly enough, wasn't the kind of woman you approved of. Clara's voice shook with years of suppressed anger. And now you have the audacity to show up here and threaten to take this baby away from the only parent she has left? Get off this property before I find my husband's rifle and give you a real reason to gossip. The women stared at Clara, shocked into silence. Mrs. Henderson recovered first, drawing herself up with offended dignity. You'll regret this, both of you. Mark my words. She turned and marched back to the wagons, the other women following in her wake. Ethan and Clara stood in the doorway, watching them leave. Rose had started to fuss, picking up on the tension in the air. When the wagons were out of sight, Clara sagged against the doorframe. They're going to do it. They're going to try to take Rose away from you. Let them try. No judge would grant custody to strangers over a father. You don't know that. In cases where moral character is questioned, judges have given children to church families before. I've heard of it happening. Clara looked down at Rose, her expression anguished. This is my fault. If I'd stayed away like I should have, this is not your fault. It's their small-minded judgment and their need to control people who don't fit into their narrow view of how life should be lived. But they're right about one thing. It does look improper. And if they petition a judge, he's going to see a widower who moved a widow into his home less than 2 months after his wife died. He's going to see exactly what they see. Ethan took Rose from Clara's arms and held his daughter close. Then we'll give him something else to see. What do you mean? Ethan looked at Clara, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Marry me. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Clara stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound. What? Marry me. Today, right now. We'll ride into town and find a justice of the peace. Make it legal and proper so they can't say anything. Ethan, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. If we're married, they have no grounds to question anything. Rose stays with us. You stay with us. And we stop caring what anyone thinks. Clara shook her head, backing away. No, that's insane. You can't marry someone just to stop gossip. I'm not marrying you just to stop gossip. I'm marrying you because I need you, because Rose needs you, because this, he gestured between them, at Rose in his arms, at the cabin around them. This works. We work. And I don't want to lose that because some bitter women have nothing better to do than judge us. But Sarah's dead. The words came out harsher than Ethan intended, and he softened his voice. I loved her. I will always love her. But she's gone, Clara, and I can't spend the rest of my life alone because people think there's a proper mourning period before you're allowed to keep living. Clara's eyes filled with tears. It's too fast. We barely know each other. I know that you saved my daughter when I couldn't. I know that you cross that field every time we need you, even when you're scared. I know that Rose lights up when she sees you, and I know that when you're here, this cabin feels like a home instead of a tomb. Ethan shifted Rose to one arm and reached for Clara's good hand with the other. I'm not asking you to replace Sarah. I'm asking you to be Clara, to be exactly who you are, and to let me stand beside you while we both figure out how to keep living after loss. I'm broken, Ethan. I lost everything. What if I can't be what you need me to be? You already are. You just don't see it yet. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. This is crazy. Probably. People will still talk. Let them. Rose deserves better than two people who got married out of desperation. Rose deserves two people who will fight for her, who will love her, who will show her that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. Say yes, Clara. Say yes, and let's build something good out of all this grief. For a long moment, Clara just stared at him. Ethan could see her working through every argument, every fear, every reason this was a terrible idea. And he could see the exact moment when she decided that maybe terrible ideas were worth trying if the alternative was more loneliness. Okay, she whispered. Yes. Relief flooded through Ethan so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. Yes? Yes, but we do this properly. We tell Rose about Sarah. We make sure she knows her real mother. We don't pretend this is something it's not. Agreed. Anything else? Clara took a shaky breath. We take it slow. Marriage on paper doesn't mean, I'm not ready for, I understand, separate beds, no expectations. We'll figure out the rest as we go. And if it doesn't work? If we realize we made a mistake? Ethan looked down at Rose, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her small face peaceful and trusting. Then we'll handle it together. But I don't think we're making a mistake, Clara. I think for the first time since this nightmare started, we're doing something right. 2 hours later, they stood in Justice Crawford's office in town. Clara in the same gray dress she'd been wearing for days, Ethan in his cleanest shirt with Rose in his arms. Justice Crawford, a practical man who'd seen enough of frontier life to know that survival sometimes required unconventional solutions, asked them 3 times if they were sure. You understand this is permanent, he said, looking from Ethan to Clara. Marriage isn't something to enter into lightly, especially under these circumstances. We understand, Ethan said. And you, Mrs. Wynne, you're doing this of your own free will? Clara looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in Ethan's arms, then at Ethan himself, this man who'd run into a storm to save her, who'd defended her against churchwomen, who'd offered her a place in his life without demanding anything in return. Yes, she said firmly. My own free will. Very well. Justice Crawford opened his book and began reading the brief civil ceremony. The words washed over Clara like water, familiar phrases about love and commitment that felt both fitting and strange given their situation. When he got to the part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, Clara half expected Mrs. Henderson to burst through the door with objections. But the door stayed closed. Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Wynne, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at Rose again, at that small face that had come to mean so much in such a short time. Thought about the empty cabin waiting across the field, the empty years stretching ahead if she said no. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Justice Crawford closed his book. You may kiss the bride, though under the circumstances a handshake might be more appropriate. Ethan and Clara looked at each other awkwardly. In the end, Ethan leaned forward and kissed her forehead gently, chastely, while Rose slept between them. Congratulations, Justice Crawford said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure congratulations were in order. I'll file the papers with the territorial government. You're legally married as of this moment. They walked out of the office into the cold afternoon air as husband and wife. Clara felt numb, disconnected from reality. Had she really just married a man she'd known for less than 2 months? A man whose wife was barely cold in the ground? Are you all right? Ethan asked as they climbed into the wagon. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Clara saw Mrs. Henderson's face when they walked in together, Ethan carrying Rose while Clara, still in her cast, held herself with new dignity. Mrs. Henderson, Ethan said pleasantly, I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Clara Cole. The color drained from Mrs. Henderson's face. You're what? We were married this afternoon by Justice Crawford. Seemed like the right thing to do, given that we're raising a baby together. Ethan smiled, but there was steel beneath it. I do hope this resolves any concerns you might have had about the propriety of our living arrangements. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But you can't. It's only been 2 months since Sarah died. Yes, and 2 months of learning that Rose needs more than I can give her alone. Clara has been a gift to both of us, and I saw no reason to wait when I'd already found someone who makes our family complete. But the mourning period is a social convention, not a law, and given that you were threatening to take my daughter away, I decided acting quickly was more important than worrying about convention. Ethan's voice hardened. So if you or anyone else has concerns about my family situation, you can direct them to my wife. I'm sure she'll be happy to set you straight. Clara found her voice, despite her shock at hearing herself referred to as Ethan's wife. We'll take 2 pounds of flour, a tin of coffee, and some sugar, please. Mrs. Henderson served them in stunned silence, her hands shaking as she measured out the flour. By the time they left the store, she'd recovered enough to say, "People will still talk, you know." "Then give them something worth talking about," Clara replied. "Tell them we're happy. It might be more interesting than the truth." On the ride home, Clara started laughing. It began as a small chuckle, then grew into full-blown laughter that had her gasping for breath. "What's funny?" Ethan asked, confused. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know." Clara wiped tears from her eyes. "I woke up this morning planning to go back to my cabin and be alone again, and now I'm married, to a man I barely know, with a daughter who isn't mine, and I'm wearing the same dress I've worn for 4 days because I didn't pack anything else. It's absurd. Do you regret it?" Clara's laughter faded. She looked at Ethan seriously. "Ask me tomorrow. That seems to be my answer for everything today." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the cabin, Ethan carried Rose inside while Clara gathered her skirts and climbed down awkwardly with her casted arm. "We should get your things from your cabin," Ethan said. "If you're going to live here permanently, live here, as your wife." Clara shook her head. "That's going to take some getting used to, for both of us." They put Rose down for her afternoon nap, then walked together across the field to Clara's cabin. It looked smaller than Clara remembered, more fragile. Or maybe she'd just grown used to Ethan's place, with its larger stove and better windows. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it the night of the storm. The mending basket beside the rocking chair, the photographs on the mantel, the small touches that made it hers. Clara moved to the photographs and picked up the one of Thomas, her thumb tracing his laughing face. "I need to bring these." "Of course." "And the rocking chair. James made it for me when I was pregnant with Thomas. I can't leave it behind. We'll bring everything you want." They worked in silence, packing Clara's clothes and personal items, loading the rocking chair onto the wagon. With each item they removed, the cabin grew more empty, more like a place someone used to live, rather than a home. Finally, only the photographs remained. Clara picked them up one by one. James on their wedding day, Thomas in his christening gown, Thomas laughing in the garden. "They should have a place in our home," Ethan said gently. "Your past doesn't disappear just because you're starting something new." "Our home." The word settled over Clara like a blanket, comforting and suffocating at once. "What about Sarah?" she asked. "Where are her things?" "In the trunk under the bed. I couldn't look at them after she died. Couldn't bear to see her dresses, her jewelry, all the small things that were hers. We should put them somewhere Rose can find them when she's older, so she knows her mother was real, was loved." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for understanding that. I know what it's like to want to preserve someone's memory, to be afraid they'll be forgotten." They locked Clara's cabin door and drove back to Ethan's. No, to their cabin now. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold. Rose was awake and fussing when they arrived, ready for her evening feeding. Clara prepared the bottle while Ethan unloaded the wagon, and they fell into their established routine as if the marriage certificate changed nothing. Feed Rose, clean the kitchen, bank the fire, prepare for bed. Except everything had changed. When it came time to sleep, they stood awkwardly in the small space, neither sure how to proceed. Ethan had given Clara the bed for the past few days, sleeping on the floor. But now they were married. Did that change the arrangement? "I'll take the floor," Ethan said finally. "You don't have to. It's your bed. It's our bed. But I understand if you're not ready to share it." Clara looked at the bed, the one Ethan had shared with Sarah, the one where Sarah had died giving birth to Rose. "I'm not ready." That's fine. I'll make a pallet by the stove. It's warmer there anyway. He did, spreading blankets and a pillow on the floor. Rose was already asleep in her cradle. Clara changed into her nightgown behind the curtain Ethan had hung for privacy, then climbed into bed. "Good night, Clara," Ethan said from his spot on the floor. "Good night." She paused. "And Ethan, thank you for today, for everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You saved me from a life of loneliness. Even if this doesn't work, even if we realize we made a mistake, at least I won't die alone and forgotten in that cabin. We didn't make a mistake." Clara wasn't sure she believed him, but she closed her eyes anyway, listening to Ethan's breathing slow and deepen, to Rose's small sleep sounds, to the wind outside the cabin walls. And for the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep in a house that held other people, people who needed her to wake up in the morning. She was a wife again, a mother of sorts, chosen by a baby who couldn't speak and a man who'd run into storms to reach her. And maybe, Clara thought as sleep finally claimed her, maybe that was enough. Clara woke before dawn to find Rose already awake in her cradle, not crying but making small cooing sounds at the ceiling. In the gray pre-dawn light, Clara could see Ethan still asleep on his pallet by the stove, one arm thrown over his face, his breathing deep and even. He looked younger in sleep, the lines of grief and exhaustion temporarily smoothed away. She slipped out of bed, wincing as her ankle protested the movement, and lifted Rose from the cradle. The baby looked at her with those serious dark eyes and reached up to touch Clara's face with tiny fingers. "Good morning," Clara whispered. "Let's let your papa sleep a bit longer." She carried Rose to the rocking chair, James's chair, now situated in the corner, and settled in to feed her. The cabin was cold despite the banked fire, and Clara pulled a blanket around both of them. Rose ate contentedly, her small hand resting on Clara's chest, and Clara found herself studying the baby's face in the growing light. She had Ethan's eyes, definitely. But her nose was all Sarah, delicate and slightly upturned. Her mouth, when she wasn't crying, had a serious set to it that reminded Clara of the photograph she'd seen of Sarah, the one Ethan kept in the trunk under the bed. "Your mama was brave," Clara whispered to Rose. "Braver than me. She gave everything so you could live. I hope you know that. I hope you grow up knowing how much you were wanted." Rose finished eating and burped against Clara's shoulder. Clara held her close, breathing in that particular baby smell, milk and soap and something indefinably sweet. Behind her, she heard Ethan stirring, the creak of joints, a soft groan as he sat up. "How long have you been awake?" he asked, his voice rough. "Not long. She was making noises, so I got her before she woke you." Ethan stood and stretched, then moved to rebuild the fire. Within minutes, warmth began to spread through the cabin. He filled the coffee pot and set it on the stove, then turned to look at Clara and Rose in the rocking chair. "That's a good sight to wake up to," he said quietly. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "She's a good baby in the mornings, all those weeks of crying at night, but mornings she's peaceful. Thanks to you, before you came, mornings were just as bad as nights." They fell into silence, both aware of the strangeness of their situation. Yesterday they'd been neighbors helping each other. Today they were legally married. Nothing and everything had changed. "Clara," Ethan said after a moment, "about yesterday. If you're going to say you regret it, please don't. I don't think I could bear it right now." "I was going to say that I know this wasn't what either of us planned, but I meant what I said. I'm grateful you're here, that you said yes." Clara looked down at Rose, who had fallen back asleep in her arms. "Ask me in a month if I made the right choice. Right now I'm still too confused to know." The days that followed developed their own rhythm, different from before but somehow more settled. Clara moved through the cabin making small changes, rearranging the kitchen so things made more sense, mending curtains, organizing Ethan's scattered tools. She set up her photographs on the mantel beside the lamp, James and Thomas taking their place in this new life without apology. Ethan worked the ranch during the day, chopping wood, tending the horses, fixing the endless things that broke in a frontier cabin. He'd come in for lunch and find Clara teaching Rose some new thing, how to track movement with her eyes, how to grip a finger, how to smile at a voice. At night, they ate dinner together at the small table, passing Rose between them when she got fussy. They talked about small things, the weather, supplies needed from town, whether the chickens Ethan wanted to buy in spring would be worth the trouble. They didn't talk about the future or examine too closely what they were building, and Ethan continued to sleep on his pallet by the stove while Clara took the bed. Neither of them suggested changing the arrangement. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara woke in the middle of the night to find Ethan sitting by Rose's cradle, his head in his hands. She could hear him crying softly, trying to muffle the sound. Claire got out of bed and knelt beside him. "What's wrong? Is Rose sick?" "No, she's fine. It's just—" Ethan's voice broke. Today would have been Sarah's birthday. She would have been 24. Clara's heart ached for him. She put her good hand on his shoulder. "Tell me about her." "What?" "Tell me about Sarah. I should know about her. Rose should hear about her. Tell me who she was." Ethan wiped his eyes and looked at Clara in the dim lamplight. "She was funny. That's the first thing people noticed about her. She could find humor in anything, even dying in childbirth." His voice caught. "Even then, she tried to make jokes. Told me not to let the baby grow up thinking serious thoughts all the time." "What else?" "She loved flowers. Spent hours in the garden back in Kansas. When we came here and saw how harsh the land was, she cried. But then she found that rose bush, probably planted by whoever owned this cabin before us, and she tended it like it was treasure. Said if one thing could bloom here, others could too." Clara listened as Ethan talked through his grief, telling stories about Sarah's cooking disasters and her attempts to befriend every animal she met, and her absolute certainty that Wyoming would be good for them, despite all evidence to the contrary. She wanted 6 children, Ethan said, a whole house full of noise and chaos. She said she grew up lonely and never wanted that for her kids. He looked at Rose sleeping peacefully. Instead, she got 1 baby and died giving her life. That's not fair. Nothing about that is fair. "No," Clara agreed. "It's not fair. Loss never is." "Do you ever stop missing them, James and Thomas?" "No, but you learn to carry the missing alongside everything else. Some days it's lighter. Some days it crushes you. But you keep carrying it because the alternative is pretending they never existed. And that's worse." Ethan reached for Clara's hand and held it tight. "I'm glad you're here. I know I keep saying that, but I need you to know I mean it. Not just because you help with Rose, but because you understand. You know what it's like to lose everything and have to keep living anyway. We're good at surviving, you and I. Maybe together we can learn to do more than just survive." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands beside Rose's cradle, 2 broken people finding comfort in shared grief. And when they finally returned to their separate sleeping places, something between them had shifted. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were partners in loss, in parenthood, in the slow work of healing. The town's response to the marriage was mixed. Some people, like Doc Murray, offered quiet congratulations and wished them well. Others, like Mrs. Henderson, made their disapproval clear through tight lips and cold shoulders. But the legal marriage accomplished what Ethan had hoped. It ended the threats to take Rose away and gave Clara a legitimate place in the household. What surprised them both was how many people began to show up at their door. The first was Martha Givens, a young woman from a homestead 10 miles north. She appeared one afternoon with a colicky baby and desperation in her eyes. "Mrs. Henderson said you might know about babies who cry all the time," Martha said to Clara, her voice trembling. "Mine hasn't slept more than an hour at a stretch in 2 weeks. My husband thinks I'm doing something wrong. I think I'm going to lose my mind." Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded. "Come in," Clara said. "Let's see what we can figure out." She examined Martha's baby, asked questions about feeding and sleeping and what made the crying worse. Then she taught Martha the same thing she'd taught Ethan, how to hold the baby to ease gas, how to swaddle tightly so the baby felt secure, how to recognize different types of cries. An hour later, Martha's baby was asleep in her arms for the first time in days. The young mother cried with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Come back if you need help," Claire said. "Babies are hard. Nobody should have to figure it out alone." Martha told other women, and they told others. Within a month, Claire had become the person isolated ranch wives came to when they needed advice about children. She never turned anyone away, no matter how much Mrs. Henderson disapproved. You're building something good here, Ethan said one evening after a particularly busy day of visitors. Helping people. It helps me too. Gives me purpose beyond just, Clara gestured vaguely, beyond just existing. You're more than just existing. You're living, finally. Clara considered this. Maybe. Some days I almost forget to be sad. Then I feel guilty for forgetting. I think Sarah would want you to forget sometimes, would want both of us to be happy. Do you really believe that? Ethan looked at Rose, now 4 months old and beginning to laugh at silly faces. I have to believe it, otherwise this grief will drown me. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, the snow melting in patches to reveal the brown grass underneath. Sarah's rosebush, dormant all winter, began to show tiny green leaves. Clara spent hours working the soil around it, preparing the garden plot for planting. Sarah would be happy someone's taking care of it, Ethan said, watching Clara work one-handed, her cast finally removed the week before. I'm doing it for Rose, so she can see what her mother loved. They planted vegetables, potatoes, carrots, beans, and Clara added flowers around the edges, wild seeds she'd collected from the prairie mixed with cultivated ones ordered from a catalog. The work was hard, and the soil was stubborn, but things grew. One evening in late April, Ethan came in from the barn to find Clara crying at the kitchen table. Rose was asleep in her cradle. Dinner was ready on the stove. Everything seemed fine except for Clara's tears. What's wrong? Ethan asked, alarm shooting through him. Today was Thomas's birthday. He would have been 6. Clara wiped her eyes roughly. I thought I was doing better, thought I'd moved past the worst of it. But days like today they knocked me down all over again. Ethan sat across from her and took both her hands in his. Tell me about him, what he was like. He loved frogs, would spend hours by the creek trying to catch them, brought them home in his pockets and they'd escape in the house. Clara laughed through her tears. James would pretend to be angry, but he thought it was funny. We were always finding frogs in the strangest places. He sounds wonderful. He was. He was everything good in the world. And then he got sick and within 3 days he was gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye properly. He was delirious with fever at the end. Didn't know who I was. They sat together in the kitchen while Clara cried and told stories about Thomas. And when she was finished, wrung out and exhausted, Ethan said something that surprised them both. We should make sure Rose knows about Thomas. He's part of our family too, even though he's gone. You'd do that? He was your son. That makes him important. We'll tell Rose about Sarah and about Thomas, about all the people who loved us before we found each other. Clara looked at this man she'd married out of desperation and necessity and felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that might, if she let it, become love. By summer, Rose was sitting up and babbling and reaching for everything within arm's length. She'd grown strong and healthy, all traces of that fragile newborn gone, and she was undeniably Clara's baby in every way that mattered. Mama? Rose said one July morning, her chubby hand patting Clara's face. Clara froze. Ethan, drinking coffee at the table, set down his cup carefully. Did she just... She doesn't know what she's saying. She's just making sounds. But Rose said it again, clearer this time. Mama. Clara looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with panic and joy and guilt all mixed together. I didn't teach her that. I swear I didn't. I know you didn't. Ethan came to stand beside them. She chose it herself, chose you. But Sarah isn't here. You are. And Rose knows the difference between a memory and the person who feeds her and rocks her and loves her every day. Ethan touched Clara's shoulder gently. It's okay to let her call you Mama. Sarah would understand. Clara pulled Rose close and let herself cry. Happy tears this time, mixed with sadness for what Sarah had missed and gratitude for what Clara had been given. Rose patted her face, unconcerned, and said, Mama, again like it was the most natural word in the world. That night, after Rose was asleep, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm for the first time in months, carrying the scent of growing things. I've been thinking, Ethan said carefully, about the sleeping arrangements. Clara's heart jumped. Oh? I'm not suggesting, I don't expect... He stopped, frustrated with himself. What I'm trying to say is that the floor is getting harder every night, and we're married, and maybe it would be all right if we just shared the bed. For sleeping. Nothing else has to change. Clara considered this. 7 months had passed since Sarah's death. 5 months since Clara had knocked on Ethan's door. 3 months since they'd married. Time enough for some of the sharp edges of grief to soften. All right, she said. But Ethan, I know, separate sides. No expectations. I understand. That night they lay on opposite edges of the bed, a careful space between them, both stiff and aware of the other's presence. Clara stared at the ceiling, listening to Ethan's breathing, feeling the warmth of another person beside her for the first time in 3 years. Good night, Clara, Ethan whispered. Good night. It took weeks for them to relax into the shared space, to stop flinching when an arm accidentally crossed the invisible line between them, to stop apologizing when they reached for the same thing at the same time. But gradually, slowly, something shifted. One night Clara woke from a nightmare about Thomas drowning and found herself curled against Ethan's chest, his arms wrapped around her while he murmured comfort into her hair. Neither of them mentioned it in the morning, but the next night, when Clara shifted closer in her sleep, Ethan didn't move away. By fall, they developed a new normal. Rose was crawling and getting into everything. The garden had produced enough vegetables to fill the root cellar for winter. The cabin, once so sparse and sad, had become a home filled with laughter and warmth and the daily chaos of raising a child. And Ethan and Clara had become something more than two broken people clinging to each other. They'd become partners, friends, and slowly, carefully, something deeper. I love you, Ethan said one night in October, the words simple and direct. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was always there and I was too scared to see it. But I love you, Clara. Not because you help with Rose or because you're here, but because you're you. And I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Clara looked at him in the lamplight, this man who'd run into storms to reach her, who'd defended her against gossip, who'd offered her a place in his life without demanding she be anything other than herself. I love you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. We can be terrified together. That seems to be what we do best. Ethan kissed her then, really kissed her, for the first time since they'd married. And Clara kissed him back, pouring months of growing affection and trust and care into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. Sarah, Clara started, would want this, would want both of us to be happy. I really believe that now. And James and Thomas would want the same for you. They loved you. That kind of love doesn't demand you stop living when they're gone. That night, for the first time, the space between them in the bed disappeared. They came together gently, carefully, two people learning how to love again after loss. And if there were tears mixed with kisses and grief woven through joy, that was fitting, because love after loss was always complicated, always contained multitudes. The next morning, Clara woke wrapped in Ethan's arms with Rose babbling in her cradle, demanding breakfast. Ethan kissed Clara's shoulder and murmured, "Good morning, Mrs. Cole." "Good morning, Mr. Cole." They smiled at each other, and Clara realized with a start that she was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer filled every corner of her life. "We should expand the cabin," Ethan said as they ate breakfast. "Add another room, maybe 2. "Why do we need more rooms?" Ethan looked at Rose, then at Clara, his meaning clear. "Well, Rose is going to need her own room eventually. And maybe, if you wanted, there might be other children." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't let herself think about more children. Hadn't dared to hope. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Not right away, but someday. Yes." Winter came again, their second together. But this time the cabin was warm and full. They celebrated Rose's first birthday with a small cake and too many presents. Clara taught her to wave goodbye and blow kisses. Ethan taught her to laugh by making silly animal sounds. And on a cold January night, exactly 1 year after the night Clara had first crossed the fence, they sat together by the fire. Ethan in one rocking chair, Clara in the other, Rose asleep in Clara's arms, and reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you remember what you said that first night?" Ethan asked, "when I asked why you came?" I said I couldn't bear to hear a child suffering. And now? Clara looked down at Rose, peaceful in sleep, then over at Ethan. Now I can't imagine not being here. This became my family when I wasn't looking. You became my home. No regrets? About marrying you? Only that it took a storm and a broken arm to make it happen. We wasted weeks being scared when we could have been building this. Ethan reached across the space between the chairs and took Clara's hand. We built it anyway. Maybe the fear made it stronger, made us appreciate it more. Maybe. In the spring, they broke ground on the addition, 2 new rooms and a proper kitchen. Clara's belly was just starting to swell with a new baby, due in late fall. Rose, now walking and talking, helped by carrying small stones and getting underfoot. The town's opinion had shifted gradually. What had started as scandal had become simply accepted. The Cole family, unconventional in its origins but solid in its daily reality, was just another family trying to make a life on the frontier. And something else had shifted too. Other women in similar situations, widows or single mothers or wives whose husbands couldn't provide what they needed, began to find their way to Clara's door. Not just for advice about babies, but for comfort, for understanding, for the assurance that it was possible to build something good from broken pieces. The cabin became known as a place of warmth and welcome. A place where you could show up unannounced and find hot coffee, a listening ear, and the kind of practical wisdom that could only come from someone who'd survived their own darkness. You've become essential to this community, Doc Murray told Clara one day. Half the women in the county consider you their lifeline. I'm just doing what someone did for me, showing up when it matters. That's exactly what makes you essential. The baby, a boy they named James Thomas Cole, was born in November during the first real snowstorm of the season. Clara labored for 12 hours with Ethan by her side, and Rose sleeping in her cradle and Doc Murray coaching them through it all. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and screaming, Clara held him close and cried tears of joy and sorrow mixed together. He looks like Thomas, she whispered, around the eyes. Then Thomas is with us again, Ethan said, kissing her forehead. All of them are. Sarah and James and Thomas. They're part of this family too. Rose woke up and demanded to see her baby brother, pronouncing him tiny and loud with the brutal honesty of a toddler. Clara laughed and pulled her close, this daughter of her heart, if not her body. You're a big sister now, Clara told her. That's a very important job. A good sister, Rose announced confidently. Yes, you are. That night, with both children asleep and the storm raging outside, Ethan and Clara lay in bed and marveled at the life they'd built. 2 years ago, I was convinced my life was over, Ethan said. I'd lost Sarah and I was losing Rose and I couldn't see any way forward. And I was sitting in an empty cabin convinced I deserved to be alone forever. Look at us now. Clara turned to face him, her body still aching from childbirth, but her heart full. We survived. We did more than survive. We built something beautiful from all that grief. We did, Ethan agreed, and we're going to keep building it for as long as we have. Years passed. Rose grew into a bright, confident girl who knew she had 2 mothers, one who gave her life and one who raised her. She tended Sarah's rosebush with reverence and listened to stories about the mother she'd never known. And she loved Clara with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who'd never known abandonment. James Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books and asked endless questions about everything. They told him about his namesakes, about James who'd been brave, and Thomas who'd loved frogs and life with fierce joy. And there were others, 2 more children born in the years that followed, filling the expanded cabin with noise and chaos and love. Each of them grew up knowing they were part of something larger than just the 5 people under one roof. They were part of a family built on loss and survival, and the courage to keep choosing love even when it hurt. The fence that had once divided 2 lonely lives was long gone, taken down the year Rose turned 3. The 2 cabins, Ethan's and Clara's, were merged into one larger homestead. But people still talked about the fence when they told the story of how the Cole family came to be. Did you really climb over a fence in the middle of the night? Rose asked her mother one evening when she was 10. I didn't climb it. I walked around it. It wasn't very tall. Clara smiled at the memory. But yes, I heard you crying and I couldn't stand it anymore, so I came. That was brave. It was selfish, actually. I came because I needed to make the crying stop, for my own sake as much as yours. But you stayed. That was brave. Clara looked at her daughter, this child she hadn't given birth to but had chosen every day since, and felt her heart swell. We were all brave. Your papa for asking for help, me for accepting that I was allowed to live again, and you for choosing me when you didn't have to. I didn't choose. You were just my mama. You always were. Rose said it so simply, as if it were obvious truth rather than the miracle it was. And maybe to her it was obvious. Maybe children understood what adults spent years trying to learn, that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was choice. Sometimes it was showing up at the right moment and refusing to leave even when leaving would be easier. That night, Clara stood on the porch of their home, expanded now to 8 rooms, bustling with life, and looked out over the land they'd built together. The garden was thriving. The barn was full. Smoke rose from chimneys of neighboring homesteads where women came for coffee and advice and the assurance that they weren't alone. Ethan came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist in the casual intimacy of long marriage. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes. Are you?" More than I ever thought possible after Sarah died, more than I had any right to expect. They stood together in the gathering darkness, two people who'd found each other in grief and built something lasting from broken pieces. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, but they weren't lonely anymore. Would never be lonely again. Because Clara had crossed a fence one desperate night, unable to bear the sound of suffering, and in doing so, she'd found her way home. The baby's cries had torn through the frozen Wyoming night. A young widowed cowboy had wondered if this was how a man went mad. And a woman next door had made a choice that changed everything, not because it was noble or selfless or particularly brave, but because she was human. And humans weren't meant to stand by while others suffered, not when there was a fence to cross. Not when there was help to give. Not when there was the possibility, however small, however unlikely, of building something good from all that loss. Years later, when Rose had children of her own, she told them the story. About the grandmother they'd never met who died bringing their mother into the world. About the other grandmother who'd crossed a fence and stayed. About a cowboy and a widow who'd been broken by grief and made whole by love. "So that's why we don't have fences around our property," Rose's daughter said, understanding. "That's right. Because fences are barriers. And in this family, we believe in crossing barriers to reach people who need us. Like Great Mama Clara did. Exactly like Great Mama Clara did." And so the story passed down through generations. The story of a baby who cried all night, a man who loved her enough to accept help, and a woman who learned that the opposite of loss wasn't protection from future loss. It was the courage to love again anyway. The fence was long gone, but its absence remained. A reminder that the best things in life often began with the simple act of crossing a boundary you'd built to keep yourself safe, of reaching towards someone else's pain because you recognized it in yourself, of choosing connection over isolation even when connection meant risking your heart all over again. Clara had crossed that fence believing she was saving a baby's life. She hadn't known she was saving her own, but that's how it worked in the end. You saved others, and in doing so, saved yourself. You built families from whatever materials grief left behind. You loved people who weren't yours by blood, but became yours by choice. And you told their stories, all of them, the lost ones and the found ones, so that no one was ever truly gone. The wind blew across the Wyoming prairie, carrying the scent of roses blooming where Sarah had planted them all those years ago. Inside the house, children laughed and Clara hummed that wordless tune she'd sung to Rose on that very first night. Ethan split wood for the stove, his movements efficient and content. And somewhere, perhaps Sarah and James and Thomas looked down and smiled. Because this was what love did after death. It didn't end. It transformed. It found new expressions through new people who carried the memory forward. The fence had divided two lonely lives. Love had erased it completely. And in its absence, a family grew, sprawling and loud and imperfect and utterly, completely whole.